Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Pinpoint Savings Targets with Accuracy, Benchmarking Purchase Services, as we continue our webinar series, Purchased Services Lifecycle Management. Today, we are excited to get started as we have some great content to share. Please feel free to use the chat feature throughout the presentation, and if time allows at the end, we will address the questions on the call. To kick off this webinar, let me start with introductions. My name is Nicole, and I am the Senior Director of Customer Success, and I am your host for this event. We are lucky to be joined by two experts from MedPricer's data team, Anna Ormiston, the Senior Director of Strategic Sourcing and Data, and Kyler Ritchie, the Manager of Data Products. They will both be sharing their benchmarking expertise with you through our time together. I am sure by now that you've seen the exciting news in the press regarding the premier acquisition of MedPricer. So I just wanted to set your mind at ease and have a quick conversation with you about what this means for MedPricer. First, we will be able to accelerate our product development across the purchase services lifecycle management and provide greater access to resources, capital, and tools. This will not impact or change the way in which we do business, and we will continue to operate autonomously and remain GPO agnostic. Additionally, the staff that you have come to know and love will not be changing, as Chris, our CEO, will continue to lead the business unit. So with that, let's get started with our exciting content today. You may ask yourself, what do all of these logos have in common? Benchmarks are everywhere in our everyday lives. Whether you are car shopping, looking for a service, comparing products, planning a trip, we all shop around to make sure that we are getting the most for our consumer dollars. And as consumerism and consumer awareness becomes more rampant, we even have databases available to assist us with shopping our medical care and to make an informed decision. As we delve into this topic, specifically related to purchase services, we hope that you will pull some key takeaways from today's learning session. 1, why is purchase services benchmarking different or unique? 2, what are some of the best practices that you need to be aware of for pricing and SLA comparisons? And how do you use the data to engage and leverage discussions with suppliers and stakeholders? Keeping those objectives in mind, I'm going to turn this part of the discussion over to Kyler, who will address the often aloof question, what are purchase services?
Thank you, Nicole. I'd like to define purchase services if we're going to do a deep dive into how you benchmark purchase services, as there seems to be a lack of definition in the industry when it comes to this topic. If you ask 5 different organizations, you're likely to get 5 different answers as to what their purchase services initiatives are and how they define purchase services. We have a broad definition at MedPricer that anything that the organization outsources to an outside supplier is a purchase service. So you'll see on this list common stakeholder groups and services that they might manage. And these are some of the common categories that we see, but it certainly isn't a comprehensive list. We have over 615 categories that we have expertise in within purchase services. So let's talk about some of the use cases for benchmarking purchase services. The first use case, and certainly one of the most beneficial, is the ability to create a roadmap of actionable opportunities. This requires a proactive approach, getting benchmarks well in advance of any impending renewals. And you're not just looking at one category if you're going to use benchmarks to create a roadmap. You're going to leverage your AP spend and expiration reports as we discussed in previous webinars. The second use case is going to be using benchmark reports to unite stakeholders to the supply chain cause. Lack of stakeholder buy-in, if initiatives are properly communicated, is a big issue, and you'll get pushback if stakeholders don't feel included. So benchmarks is one way to rally the troops and get stakeholders involved if you can properly communicate the upside. The next use case is probably the most obvious and well-known benefit of benchmarking, right? You want to be able to lower your costs. And I think whenever you say the word benchmark, that's what people initially think of. It is the cost benefit. But moving on to the fourth use case, benchmarking purchase services should go beyond costs. Firstly, looking at contract terms, for example, termination. Bulk gas. Termination language in bulk gas contracts are not necessarily a given, just because there's a huge upfront investment from bulk gas suppliers that they can't recoup until maybe the first 3 or 4 years of the agreement. So termination without cause in a bulk gas agreement may not be a given. So benchmarking your contract terms will give you more insights into what termination language is appropriate. And then benchmarking your scope of work, for example, environmental services. Environmental services scope of works can be a dozen pages long. And so your benchmarking provider should be able to provide insights into how best to structure your scope of work and your agreements. And then lastly, of course, KPIs. Your benchmarking provider should be providing KPI recommendations for each category, and those KPIs should be unique to the category.
Yeah, so, KPIs are going to really help you bring value to your contract, and hold your supplier to what the service qualities that you agree to. And so if you put that all together, that's going to help create sourcing efficiencies, right? So if you do a benchmark and you know that you have great value and great terms and great pricing in your contract, you can just check that box and move on. Well, if you know that you have a lot of room to improve, maybe that's something that you want to put time and resources into a full RFP.
Thank you both so much for that additional groundwork. Anna, can you spend a few minutes talking us through what makes purchase services so difficult to benchmark?
Yeah, absolutely. So, supply chain really has only recently started looking at purchase services. They historically have been focused on labor and supplies. And why is that? Those costs are usually contained within supply chain, both contracting and cost monitoring. As Kyler showed on one of the previous slides with all those different categories, one of the first things that you're going to see in purchase services is that it's actually really difficult to even find the owner of the service. Those categories touch so many different stakeholders that you may not even know who to go talk to. And if these stakeholders happen to be writing their own agreements, let's say, for example, HR, may have written their own background screening services contract. If they did it on their own, that likely means that it never even went through supply chain, so you don't know about it. You don't even know what the terms are that you agree to in there. There may be issues that, as a health system, you have certain language that has to go in there, and they didn't even think about putting it in. So when you start trying to find, all right, so where's my purchase services? The first step a lot of people are going to turn to is data. And so you may look at PO. You're going to find quickly that a lot of services don't hit PO. So then you're going to switch over to looking at your AP file. Well, that is thousands upon thousands of line items if it's not categorized. So if you don't even know who, your background screening suppliers might be, how are you ever going to find it in there? But let's say best case scenario, you actually know you have a contract and you know the suppliers and what the spend is. How are you going to source that moving forward? Products you may be able to turn to a GPO to get something done quickly, but services you're likely going to have to do at the lower level, which means you're going to have to find, staff and time to do this. Diving into a little bit more about what makes it so different than products. So, products has this great thing called the SKU. And so, that SKU is going to tell you what the product is, who manufactures in it, and in a lot of cases, you're going to even have cross-reference information for competitive suppliers about what products that they have that are comparable. How do you even do that with services? For quality, you can get your stakeholders together in a room and they can touch and feel that product. They can pass it around. You probably even have value analysis committee, right? That's going to tell you what the clinical impact is of that product. For services, it's really subjective. A hospital A could be, in love with their weight services provider. They think they're reliable, they think they're great. Hospital B down the street using the exact same supplier hates them. And it's because they have different definitions of quality and definitions and requirements of their contracts. And so it's not really comparable. And, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but for products, you're going to have a slew of GPO contracts that you're likely just going to be able to buy off of. For services, there's light coverage in the national GPO space, and it's really because it's hard. All of these contracts and services are really customized at the local level. And because of that, you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort into developing separate SOWs, even, within your health system per site. So let's say, one of your hospitals needs in landscaping, the trees trimmed like twice a year for anything under 20 feet. But another hospital says, no, I need it 4 times a year and for anything under 25 feet. So all of this together kind of justifies why you have to handle services differently.
Kyler, now that Anna has provided an overview of why purchase services are different from a benchmarking perspective, which, by the way, thank you, Anna, for these insights, can you help the group understand why having an understanding of your benchmarking company's methodology is important? Like, why should the users actually care?
Sure, and we'll start off with that by talking about why looking outside your network is important in driving maximum value. And for this example, we're going to use medical coding. And this service is usually provided remotely, so regionality isn't a huge consideration when looking at this data. When comparisons are made with GPO data, the data has very little variance, as you'll see here. We've got a lot of $60 data points here. With a few organizations that negotiated that rate beyond the GPO rate, the data points, they are below the $60 rate. But when you expand the data set outside of the GPO relationship, we see very little pricing discipline from the suppliers. A lot of room for negotiation and very substantial savings that exceed the GPO's reach. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the methodology behind purchase services benchmarking. And there's category dynamics that affect the benchmark, such as the location that affects maybe the pricing or the provision of the service, or what is the competitive landscape for the category. Local competitive landscapes can be different for services that are provided on site, such as lithotripsy. But in the previous example, medical coding, you're not going to see a local competitive landscape that differs from the national landscape. Also, the current suppliers that you're using. Is it consolidated? Are you using a lot of suppliers, or is it all a fragmented spend? Adding on to that, are your sites consolidated? Do you have multiple hospitals using different vendors? And then looking at your existing contracts, what's your annual spend with the supplier? We talked about this a little bit earlier, leveraging spend to drive cost savings. All of these factors are used to compile a benchmarking report with one of our analysts. And now that we've discussed some of these parametric factors at a high level, let's talk about how they're applied to a specific category. And for this example, we're going to use waste management services. This one is one of my favorite categories to benchmark just because there's different factors that affect pricing and terms, and it's a really unique and customized benchmarking experience every time. So to start, just within waste management services, you're going to have different waste streams, for example, pharmaceutical waste, regulated medical waste. And within those different waste streams, we've got multiple different pricing methods. So per ton or per pull for municipal waste. And if you're looking at regulated medical waste, it may be per pound or per container. This all adds to the complexity of the category. And what we've seen recently when we're talking about pricing strategies is suppliers trying to bundle pricing together into a monthly fee. So for example, they'll cover regulated medical waste for a flat fee of $5,000 per month. This pricing methodology makes it incredibly difficult to benchmark because the utilization at that facility may be fluctuating month to month, and so that price should be fluctuating as well. So when we talk about benchmarking flat rates against other organizations, utilization is key to benchmarking those flat rates. Certain categories utilization needs to be taken into account more when benchmarking, but waste management, it's certainly key to providing an accurate benchmark. Another factor here is the current annual spend. With waste management, your total contract value is a big driver of cost here. Another impact here is the regulatory environment. The state of California has unique EPA regulations that impact pricing. But one state you may not think of that has regulatory issues that impact pricing is Utah. The state of Utah has recently put down pretty hefty fines against one supplier in the state, which caused them to actually close one of their plants. And the result of this is that the hospital has to ship their waste across multiple state lines, hundreds of miles, which results in a higher rate that they have to pay. And so when you get a benchmark from your benchmark provider, these are all the factors that really should be factored into the benchmark. It's not just a simple rate compared to another contract's rate. These are all factors that have to be taken into consideration when benchmarking.
Wow, Kyle, that's really great information. We can really see how having a detailed understanding of the methodology and the parametric factors can impact a benchmark report. So Anna, what are the most valuable components within a benchmark report? Is the primary purpose just to evaluate pricing?
You know, that's going to be the first thing that people look at, right? Is can I save money? But I really caution everyone not to look at pricing or savings just from a total contract value, but actually look at your individual service line items within that contract to see what savings you can achieve. So, you know, you can go to your supplier and say, you know, give me 10% savings. But if you look at a detailed benchmark that has rates by service line item with your utilization coupled in there, you may find that on a high utilized item, you could save 20%. And so instead of just going to ask for this generic 10%, which may not provide as much impact, maybe you need to focus on that one line item that shows, 20% and spend your time there. But once you have those rates, it's really important to understand the variables that were considered to get your benchmark rates in the first place. One of the main drivers we've talked about already today in purchase services for pricing is geography, but that's not every category. We went over medical coding earlier, that if it's off-site, I don't expect a hospital, let's say in Arizona, to pay a different price than a hospital in Florida. It doesn't matter where in the country, or maybe depending on how your hospital's rules are set up, maybe even where in the world that supplier is. The rate should stay the same. Kyler, are there any, other services you think of that geography does really impact it?
Yeah, I think one category where geography really affects the rate is dialysis. A huge cost driver for this service is nursing labor. So comparing rates from California to, say, New Mexico may not be an applicable benchmark. These rates need to be adjusted based on the state that the service is being provided.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we talk about this because if you try and negotiate your benchmark rates, one of the first things that the supplier may try and do is attack the data set behind it. They may say, I can't give you that price. That's an old price. Where you are in the country, you guys have to, purchase differently. We have to charge you differently. We're dealing with this actually with a current customer up in the Northeast. We did a blood benchmark. A lot of hospitals across the U.S. think, it matters where you are when you purchase through a blood supplier. And we've seen, hundreds of data points, and honestly, there's little to no impact based on geography for your price of red blood cells. And so we did this benchmark for them, and they went to the supplier, and the first thing the supplier said was, I can't give you that price because you're in the Northeast. I have to give you a different price. That data set is not right. And so we helped them craft a message back to the supplier, talking through, here's all the data set points that were used. Go back to them and say, listen, supplier, we want to do business with you. We're trying to be a good partner, but now I have, a benchmark report in my hand that shows that I'm not buying a market competitive price from you. And my leadership is going to ask why I'm doing that. So, help us continue to work together to get to something that is fair and reasonable for both parties so that we don't have to go to RFP. We focus on price a lot naturally in benchmarks because that's what people want to see. But I can't tell you the amount of value you're going to leave off the table if you don't look at key performance indicators or KPIs. A lot of contracts that I look at, they just don't have KPIs in purchase services today. It's still something that people are just starting to write into their agreements. And when I talk to them, I talk to hospitals and say, hey, did you think about writing this in there? Was this ever discussed? They say, no, but I have termination for convenience. And so I can get out of this contract if my service levels are bad, which is great. You always want to have termination for convenience in your contract, but if you stop and think about it for a sec, how hard was it to get that contract in place, the first time around? You had to get all your stakeholders together. Maybe you had to get stakeholders from several different sites, and that took forever just honestly to even schedule the kickoff meeting, right? And then you had to get them all to agree on the RFP and the service levels and what is good quality and price. And then, you had to put it through your legal, which sometimes takes forever. You don't really want your only remedy to be terminating the contract. So you should put that on your benchmarking partner. Tell me what quality indicators should I be monitoring and what penalties should I be putting for the supplier, so that way for the life of the agreement, you're really just encouraging the supplier to provide a high level service versus just that one penalty of we're just going to have to walk away. When you look at KPIs, though, there are other ways that you can write them into your agreement outside of just, in that last example with like waste, you need to make sure they're delivering their waste on time on the designated days within a certain, hour threshold. Another thing you can look at is writing into KPIs in your contract is for cost. And so, a lot of purchase services, the cost is not going to be the same every month. If we want to look at maybe food nutrition management services as an example. So your contracts are likely structured with a per patient day rate and then a variable rate. And that's based on, the past 12-month census when you guys were negotiating to get those two rates together. So that means in any given month, just your total bill from those two line items below is going to vary based on your patient census. And that's not even taking into consideration those costs that can really vary, such as maybe like floor stocks or catering. So, you don't want to find out at the end of the month that there was a staff meeting where catering was ordered and they got steak and lobster, right? I mean, that's going to be a huge bill. You want to put that on your supplier partner to set thresholds to help monitor those fluctuating costs and to let you know if something doesn't look right, and to let you know maybe if the person who ordered catering wasn't authorized to order catering. So ask them to do that. And then lastly, when you're thinking about those clinical categories, that brings KPIs to a whole other level. Joint Commission is expecting you to write quality and indicators in your contracts that you're regularly monitoring. Food nutrition, obviously, that touches the patient, but when you think of something like lithotripsy, if you have service issues with your lithotripsy provider, we're talking not only potential patient harm, but potential harm to your system, not only in terms of Joint Commission fines or maybe losing certification.
Now that we understand what the key components and data you should be seeing beyond price to ensure you get the best contract for your organization, let's take a look at how leveraging benchmarks will give you optimal results. First, let me say the best way to leverage benchmarks is simply to request them and use them. The benchmark should be used for incumbent negotiations as well as for creating RFP events to drive competition and change. A case example that I wanted to review with you today is transcription. We were working with a customer who leveraged a benchmark report on transcription to get a base understanding of the fees and the service level agreements that they should obtain for a new award. Armed with this knowledge, the customer decided to use the live negotiation platform post-RFP to drive results. As you will notice on the slide, the full live negotiation event took 120 minutes beginning to end, creating efficiencies for their strategic sourcing team. Their incumbent supplier at the top in red was the highest price provider leading into this event. Each change marked with a pencil is the point in time in which a vendor adjusted their key terms and conditions, and each change marked with a dollar sign is where the vendors adjusted pricing, all based on customer feedback that was provided through the benchmark report. Through the use of this platform, as time went on, you will note that the incumbent realized they were not in the lead and that they drastically dropped their pricing near the end of the event to try and secure the business. Many organizations would look at that price and they would say, they really want to work with us. It would be easy to stay with them because there's no cost to conversion. However, other organizations would look at the same results and say, wow, they've really been hosing us the past X number of years that we've been doing business with them. What kind of partner are they really? Even still, other organizations may say, let's take the absolute lowest cost provider. I'm here to tell you that is not the recommended approach. And I would tend to agree with the sentiments of the organization who did not feel like their vendor had been a partner of theirs. In addition to taking that lowest cost provider, it may come at a cost of value and quality of service. So it's important to weigh the full package here. What is the best service I can obtain within my personal requirements at the lowest cost, looking at total cost of ownership? This particular hospital did end up deciding to move away from their incumbent, and I think they made the right choice. However, they selected the second vendor from the bottom, giving them a win-win. They negotiated the best service for the best price for the service levels that they needed. As Anna had mentioned earlier, price isn't the only key factor. We've seen some great things come out of leveraging benchmarks. Anna, can you review some of the different ways that customers have utilized benchmarks to impact their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm showing a great story on the screen here. So we were working with a customer in California, and they were looking at their waste management services. They had talked internally and just wasn't that interested in going out to bid, kind of wanted to stay with their current incumbent. So they just went to their current supplier and said, hey, what can you do for me here? And the supplier came back with $400,000 in savings. I don't know about you guys, but I think a lot of people would have taken that money and ran, right? If you're being monitored on how much savings you provide to the organization, you might just want to take that check, check the box, and move on to something else. But, to Nicole's point earlier, they kind of thought, well, wait, like, if you're my current supplier and you've been giving me business all these years, am I not getting the best price? And so they requested a benchmark. So they sent over the contracts and utilization. We ran the report and said, look, it actually looks like there's probably about $800,000 in opportunity here. And so now the health system is thinking, wait, maybe I really have been getting a bad deal all these years. So instead of just renegotiating with them, I think I need to take this out to bid. And so they ran a full RFP process going into it with their benchmark report. So they knew the rates that they wanted to pay, they knew the terms that they wanted to get, and they knew the KPIs that they wanted to write into their contract. They ran the RFP and even put a live negotiation on the back end of the example we just talked through earlier, and they were able to get $1.2 million in savings without having to change suppliers. So that just goes to show you the power of information that a benchmark can give you. If you go into your negotiations and your sourcing event, you can increase your savings potential and your contract terms and KPI potential. Some of the other things that we have seen from other health systems recently, we worked with someone who got 13% savings in translation and interpretation. And I bring this up because this category is regularly ripe with savings. So if you aren't looking at it, I highly recommend. We just worked with another hospital that was putting their laundry and linen services out to bid. They were actually facing a 30% increase with their incumbent. Their incumbent, wanted to actually build a new distribution plant, and they were kind of essentially passing the cost on to that customer in the terms of their per pound rate. But through the benchmark, they were able to achieve 10% savings and KPI improvements. We saw a quick win for a hospital in Texas that got $50,000 savings on medical coding. And, you can do these benchmarks one-off, and I'm telling you, over time, the savings really. So we worked with a coalition in the South that they had $35 million savings over the past decade. And then another system that we've been working with for years, they have gotten up to $82 million in savings, which is 20 times the ROI. So I really recommend this is something that you build on over time, because these dollars are going to hit your bottom line.
Wow, those are all really great examples. Kyler and Anna, thank you both so much for your valuable information that you have shared today. In recap of the key objectives, I trust that you're walking away feeling more informed about purchase services and benchmarking. You should now know why a different approach is needed for benchmarking services, how variations in parametric factors have to be considered, and understanding the methodology is important, why transactional data is the best of data, and the importance of looking beyond your GPO for benchmarks, and how benchmarks allow you to gain better transparency in pricing, improve terms, stakeholder engagement when leveraged appropriately. We did receive a few questions through the chat feature, and unfortunately we are out of time, so we will address these questions through a Q&A document offline. But I'd like to thank everyone for your participation. And again, thank you so much to both Anna and Kyler for your key insights. We'll see you next time with the 5th episode as we continue our webinar series, Purchased Services Lifecycle Management. Another exciting announcement, we will be releasing our new pipeline performance management updates next month. That's just a few days away. That's it for today's webinar. If you'd like to learn how MedPricer helps hospitals optimize their contracting potential through benchmarking, feel free to reach out to us. To see our purchase services solutions, visit us online at medpricer.com to request a demo. Have a great day, everyone.